Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. An E. coli outbreak in McDonald's Quarter Pounder hamburgers has been linked to onions. As of Thursday, none of those cases are in North Carolina, but a parasite that sickened people in our state has also been linked to onions. Though these are not connected, it raises questions about the safety of eating raw onions. WRAL Health reporter Grace Hayba joins me to talk about what health experts are saying, because obviously this headlines are getting people's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally almost always get an onion when I go grocery shopping. It's in like a bunch of different recipes that I typically rely on when meal prepping and stuff. So I'm just like our viewers. I want to know what's going on. And I my first thought was, have I eaten one of these? But the good answer for most of us listening here in the Triangle and across North Carolina is it's highly unlikely that you actually would have eaten one of these. Unless, of course, you've recently traveled, I guess, to Colorado or California or any of these impacted areas. So the E. coli outbreak that we're seeing right now in the headlines, the places that has been linked to are mainly to the west of us. As of early Thursday evening, McDonald's locations in 12 states have stopped serving onions and quarter pounder patties linked to this current E. coli outbreak. And those are, again, in the western part of the U.S. I'm going to list them off to you just in case I don't know, maybe you've traveled there.
Or you have family there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's going to be Colorado, Kansas, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Iowa, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Kind of sounded like I was singing the 50 Nifty state songs there for a little bit. But again, you'll notice that we didn't say North Carolina. It's because North Carolina is not yet on that list. As Grace mentioned, no cases have been reported yet here within our state lines. Also new as of late Thursday evening, McDonald's announced that the onions involved in this current outbreak came from a single grower in California. California is our country's largest producer of onions, so that's not entirely unsurprising either. And right now is a really prime time for onion growth, and it is onion season. So a spokesperson said that the onions came from one farm and were processed in one facility. The FDA has also identified it is investigating a Taylor Farms facility in Colorado as the facility where those onions may have been processed out of California. So it seems like we have two new pieces to this puzzle identified as of Thursday. And we also learned U.S. Foods, which is a restaurant distributor that works with Taylor Farms, is also now taking precautions. It told customers that it plans to recall 4 raw onion products because of potential contamination, and it said it was doing this out of an abundance of caution. So it seems like we now have a better idea of where those onions were grown, where they were processed, and who could have distributed them to these McDonald's locations. Yum Brands, you might have been familiar with that. It's a company that owns a number of other fast food chains. It's also now taking precautions, and the company says it's pulling onions and onion products from some restaurants, including select Taco Bells, Pizza Huts, and KFCs. Again, those are mainly to the west of us, and we know several smaller chains, too, in Colorado are also now temporarily putting a pause on those onion products while things get sorted out.
Okay. So obviously a lot happening with that, continuing to develop with it, with that particular outbreak. I do want to also touch on this parasite that we've been covering for months. This is the Cyclospora, right? So people may remember hearing about that. So can you refresh our memory and what has become the tie to onions that this now has?
Yeah, so identified over the summer months was what we now know is Cyclospora. We just really found out about it all because a viewer reached out to us saying, hey, I got sick, my family member got sick, my best friend got sick, we couldn't figure out what was going on, and it wasn't until my best friend got so sick that they had to go to the hospital and was tested for this parasite that we figured out that we had all eaten something at a local restaurant, and we had got sick with this parasite known as Cyclospora. So it makes people really sick with really gross symptoms. They're super unpleasant. You have a lot of stomach aches, cramping, and bad diarrhea, things like that, and just uncontrollable bowel movements really is what a lot of people that I spoke with all described having. And so again, that was what we learned about in August, but these people who had gotten sick said that it happened, kind of in the weeks and months prior to us starting to investigate and report on it. Now, that led us then, obviously, to talk to the Wake County Health Department, and after some back and forth and continued investigation on our end, we were able to confirm that over 120 cases of Cyclospora were identified in Wake County alone, most of those from June and July. And statewide, our total was over 200 cases. And so, again, some people reached out saying, people had to be hospitalized for it, but no deaths were linked to those Cyclospora cases. In Wake County, the health department did say that the outbreaks were tied to at least 3 restaurants, but they did not name what those restaurants are. You might have remembered we were on the podcast. We talked about that as well. And every time that we asked the health department, are you going to name them? Will you name them? We continued to be told no. And the reason why was because after these cases were reported, health inspections and investigations were done, and they did not reveal any wrongdoing by the restaurants. And it's simply because of the way Cyclospora grows. It takes a long time to develop. You cannot see it with your eye. And it's just simply something that someone who is following every single guideline within a restaurant wouldn't have been able to avoid. It would have had to do with the product themselves and not the business. So, that was the main reason why they did not name those restaurants. And also, unlike E. coli, Cyclospora typically takes several days, even weeks, before someone who eats it or eats a contaminated product gets sick. So, imagine trying to remember every little thing that you ate over the past 2 weeks. You might remember, I said it in a story, you might remember the salad mix you brought for lunch, but are you also going to remember the little sprinkle of cilantro or parsley that you put on your tacos the 4 days before that for dinner, or on your pasta? Those little things could also be the causative agent that would easily slip someone's mind. So these food inspectors or investigators, they're really trying to go through every single person's food history and look at links, and that just takes a lot of time. So it's not just as simple as saying, oh, you all ate this burger. It's what's every single thing that went into that burger, and have other people also eaten it and now had the same issue as well. And are we seeing this beyond just one restaurant, which again is what we saw happen here in North Carolina. And some of those cases too weren't linked to the restaurant either. So another reason why the health department didn't name who those restaurants were. So it's definitely hard to narrow down exactly what the causative agent is in these foodborne illness outbreaks. And it just simply usually doesn't happen until after that outbreak stops. And that's because the affected produce typically isn't being consumed anymore because it's not being distributed at that point.
Okay, let's take a quick break right there and we'll be right back. Grace, before the break, you were explaining the differences between this E. coli outbreak and the Cyclospora outbreak, which affected people here. Another difference, of course, the Cyclospora outbreak seems to be over. The E. coli thing, though not in North Carolina, still kind of actively ongoing. We continue to learn things about it. And they both just happen to do with onions. So who did you talk to about these outbreaks to find out what was really going on here?
Yeah, so with Cyclospora months ago, I started with the Wake County Health Department asking, hey, have you heard about this? What are we seeing? I also reached out to the state health department as well, folks with DHHS, and just asked a lot of the same questions, like what's going on? Have you heard of this? Are people in our area getting sick? And are these investigations going on? Which, yes, again, we figured out that, yes, they were, and it's this thing called Cyclospora, and that led us basically to where we are today. I had also reached out to the CDC and FDA about if they were aiding in investigations. They said that they were, and that other Cyclospora cases had been reported in other states as well. So I've also spoken with food safety experts at NC State who explained which processes investigations typically follow and what food inspectors look for when things like this are reported. And again, just really emphasized how difficult it can be in some instances, especially with something like Cyclospora, which again, we talked about takes a long time for you to even realize you are sick. Just really emphasizing that those types of investigations can be tricky and difficult to narrow down, and it could just simply take a long time to figure out what is making sick, which isn't great, right? We want to know what to avoid, but that's where the tricky part of this really comes into play for them.
Okay. And so what did experts say about onions in this case? Like, what is their likelihood to be contaminated with bacteria versus parasites?
Yeah, so ultimately it can be both, right? And that's what we've seen. E. coli is the bacteria versus Cyclospora is a parasite. They're two different things. They grow in different ways, but yet onions, we found out, can actually be pretty good hosts for both of them. And it's simply really because of the environment where onions are grown and processed can also be the same that would really foster bacteria and parasitic growth as well. So onions also have a very long shelf life, which could further increase the chance that even just one contaminated onion could then spread and infect all of those around it, right? You walk around a grocery store, they're not individually packaged. They're in a bin with, they're in a cardboard box with dozens of others. So if even one of those onions is infected and they're kind of sitting out or sitting on the truck as they're being transported, all of that can then spread to all of those onions around it. Even if it was limited to one onion too, if it's put in some sort of processing machine, maybe something that slices it or dices it or even washes it at any point, then that bacteria that's on that onion could then easily spread to any other produce, not even just onions, but any other produce that's then put through that same machinery. And our experts also explained that it could even be something as simple as the manure or fertilizer that's used to grow onions or another type of produce. So again, it as you can hear us talking about, that's why it's so difficult for these investigators to determine exactly where something may have came from.
Right. And with all that said, I mean, how can people protect themselves from this? And like, how prevalent, I guess, is what we're seeing?
Yeah, the takeaway is not to avoid your vegetables. That's not what we want to say. Again, I started this off by saying I typically get onions and cucumbers and several things that have been linked to E. coli or salmonella or a number of different foodborne illnesses. That's just what happens with food, right? It's unfortunate. We don't want to see it, but that is what happens. As always, the best pieces of advice, especially for things like this, is to thoroughly wash like any produce, herbs and vegetables, things like that you're getting from grocery stores or farmers markets or wherever, and make sure that you're cutting away bruised and damaged fruits and vegetables as well. And then thoroughly cooking that produce is going to kill both the E. coli, if there is any on it, and Cyclospora. So high heat and temperatures like that will help. So, like we saw, McDonald's is pulling these slivered onions. Those aren't cooked down, right?
Right.
So if you're going to do something like an onion and you're worried about it, do like a caramelized onion or something like that, right? Where it's overheat for a long time. That's going to help kill away if there was any bacteria or parasite on it to begin with. Cooking it down will help. But again, I want to leave our viewers with a good, some peace of mind here. Again, the Cyclospora outbreak here in North Carolina was declared over several months ago. We haven't seen any cases for months, and we also haven't identified any cases of E. coli either linked to McDonald's here in North Carolina. So that's not just here in the Triangle, it's anywhere in our state. So far, no cases have been reported here. We definitely hope that continues. We'd obviously keep you updated if we do learn more. But as of right now, if you have onions and you're cooking them, maybe you just ate some for lunch or dinner, the likelihood that you're going to be okay is pretty high. And just make sure that, as with any time, you just handle your food appropriately.
All right. Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with triangled news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.